the stupendous Brian Ferry with and Roxy Music there with Both Ends Burning. Oh, let's bring that mic in a bit closer. The stupendous Roxy Music there, preceded, of course, by the just plain fucking stupid, fucking hell, It's Fred Titmus by Half Man, Half Biscuit. Wonderful album, that. Back in the DHSS. Second album title, Back in the DHSS. Again. Fabulous band. Okay, yeah, that's Roxy Music, Both Ends Burning. Very apt tune for me at the moment. That definitely describes my life at the moment. Since I was on the mic this time last week, my feet literally haven't touched the floor. This hasn't been because my life has been such a whirlwind, but merely because I've been laid up with my sciatica and have quite literally not been able to touch the floor. Just because I've been laid up in my bed doesn't mean that I haven't been working my tits off. The whole kind of welfare.org.uk crew have been rallying around the construction of the website and the production of the necessary materials, and everything's coming along there just unbelievably. Got to give a big up just to the whole community really on that one, because everyone except for John Harris appears to be fully backing it. So more power to you lot. Shame, John, never mind. You're lost, mate. Oh, okay, well, tonight I've been watching TV, and I don't know whether you lot know about my kind of history in the audio tech business. I quit my last client in the conference world kind of last autumn. Just wasn't getting along with the work, just couldn't do the corporate bullshit anymore. Sell your soul for £175 a day. But before I did the conference work, I worked largely as a cameraman, although broad AV tech, working in audio as well. And purely by chance, I ended up in a media, working as a freelance for a media training outlet. This bunch was essentially a sidearm off of a main PR company, and I'm talking main PR company, mainstream. You'll never have heard their name, but they are one of the biggest in the industry, which is why you've never heard their fucking name. I, for my own reasons, will keep that to myself, just simply because I don't want really to have to be fending off their lawyers. But so a certain amount of names and pack drills will be removed from this dissemination. But essentially, having been the wrong end of the camera and the wrong end of the editing suite, for these hideous, mind-numbing exercises in teaching chiefs of corporations and the leaders of industry how not to make a prick out of themselves on TV, basically used to involve filming them raw, with some touchy subjects, you know what I mean, just simply putting them in the studio, putting them in front of an old hack or newsman or whatever, and filming the consequence of them being drilled by this interviewer, and then through stages of showing them themselves on camera and illustrating to themselves which parts of their behaviour jump out and are detracting from the mission statement. Now, bearing in mind the whole reason for doing this was so that if, like, you know what I mean, an oil rig blew up or a nuclear power plant went into meltdown, that the CEOs wouldn't come on and say, well, it would appear that our share price is holding steady, so no particular reason to worry, because that had crashed more companies than they like to consider at that point. Media is a very powerful tool, and if it points the wrong way, they're in trouble. So essentially, it was a means of training these bosses, these CEOs, how not to make a prick out of themselves in public. And if, you know what I mean, some hideous disaster went off, the first thing that they would have to come to the mic and say, of course, before we say anything about the disaster, of course, you have my heartfelt sympathies go out to the victims and the loved ones of any victims. And of course, we are doing everything in our power to yada yada, bollocks. And of course, they weren't doing anything different to what they would have been doing had they have come on and said, well, it doesn't appear that our share price has been affected. So essentially what we're talking about here is a means of big corporations micromanaging disaster situations so as to minimise their financial impact. That was largely what I was involved in. Anyway, so that just gives you a kind of ground in that essentially I haven't worked in mainstream news media, although I have worked for mainstream media in the kind of entertainment side. I have essentially run the equivalent of a kind of micro newsroom, post-production and pre-production. Basically, on my Todd, I'd get sent out to these dudes with me and just an old hack. And obviously he doesn't know nothing about the tech, so essentially I would be cameraman, audio, editor, production, director, all in the one suit sort of thing. So essentially I got to see not only the construction of these news phonies, these news story phonies, that essentially the coup was to train these people to say as little as fucking possible when they came to the mic, and to make it sound like they were saying as much as possible. And essentially we had, all sorts of things, like we'd stick them on swivelly chairs for their first one. We'd stick them on a swivelly chair with no coffee table around. Lovely old trick. I've actually seen Paxman pull it a couple of times, where normally he'll interview somebody with a desk in between them, and with them both sat on identical chairs. I'm pretty sure that it was Paxman that I've seen interviewing somebody in a static chair himself, with his interviewer on a wide shot, which is really unusual. Normally you will only see the interviewer from a head and shoulders shot or from a waist upwards shot, kept in wide view the whole time. And the reason for this is that the tendency is to make the person sitting in the swivel chair, because they've got no fixed point of reference, no TV studio, there's all sorts of things going on the far side of the camera you won't be seeing. There'll be runners running about, there'll be sound guys shuffling about to get to get the best audio, there'll be cameras rolling in and out to frame the different shots before you get to see them on the screen. So of course there's a whole range of distractions, and this is very disorienting for somebody who's sitting in a swivel chair. And so the tendency is for somebody to sit in a swivel chair is to fidget and to swivel slightly. And they say that the camera does not lie. Well, the camera also has a nasty habit of exaggerating the smallest thing. And if you have an interviewer who is stock still in frame, sitting poignantly like an expectant school teacher in front of a potentially quite revealing guest, and essentially presenting the image of them as the naughty schoolchild on the teacher's swivel chair, being admonished, and that this was essentially, had you have had the sound cut on that particular piece, you would have had no impression as to what the man was saying. The entire impression of the scene and the way that it was filmed, and the framing of the shot was very specifically done so as to show this person in a very bad light. Now that's a pretty broad stroke example, but I'll give you some more. If you watch any program that contains one of the conspiracy file programs, you know what I mean, the mainstream media coverage of 9/11 conspiracy and the like, or the UFO topic, or anything from the kind of paranormal field, you will always see the scientist will be sat behind his desk in a well-lit office with a bright window behind him, with papers on the desk in front of him. He'll be sat up dead straight. He will be shot in a square ahead shot, with him framed central to the image, with him looking large but not too large and important behind his desk. You'll see any of the non-scientific speakers on the subject, you know what I mean, the David Ickes of this world, that will be included in the programme. Watch for the framing of their part to play in this discussion, in inverted commas. What you'll see is very odd colours being used. They often use like a green lighting for these situations, because again, it's this pantomime, you know what I mean? In the pantomime, we have the green light will come on when the witches are out. Yeah, so if you know what I mean, in this representation to this childlike sheeple mind of the groupthink of mainstream media consumers, we have this direct representation of this kind of fantasy world where reality is plasticized and stretched to barely believable limits, but as long as it stays within barely believable, the eye is deceived and the mind will believe. And so even if we find ourselves musing that the conspiracy theorists may have presented a more valid argument in a show like the Conspiracy Files on 9/11, what we're left with the feeling is that we can't necessarily trust what we have just been told by them, that perhaps their argument was strong, but that we have this feeling that, well, we don't quite, you know, when the scientists were that much more convincing, even though their arguments were much more thin and seemed to be more flimsy, but for some reason I feel drawn to their conclusions. I feel that I can trust their conclusions. And this has been done to you. This has been done to you by the program maker. This has been done to you by the director and the producer of that program. They have had an agenda. And through the careful use of camera work, editing and lighting, you have this charade going on, this pantomime. And one of the things that's really kind of set me off on this is watching things like EastEnders and Hollyoaks whenever I kind of overview somebody else watching them, or most of the newsrooms now. I was watching Watchdog with interest tonight, and one of the things that's really started to alarm me is the use of odd camera angles and extremely vivid lighting, and the stage lighting seems to largely consist of a purple-like light. But knowing what I do about stage lighting, it strikes me that this purple light probably isn't actually a true purple, and what they're actually doing is projecting simultaneously red and blue next to each other. Now, if you start to kind of look for this red and blue theme and think about the colour saturation of the image on your screen, you'll start to see that this artificial purple colour saturation, or red and blue, as I suspect it may well be, colour saturation is everywhere. And it would be understandable in the stage set studio shots of the likes of Watchdog or the BBC News. It would be understandable if you could conceivably explain this away by simply calling it a branding, like the colour branding of a particular brand being a particular shade of blue or red. I mean, BBC News is that crimson red at the moment, and again with the ticker tape on the screen and with the large amounts of red in the studio and the stage set, what we have is a colour saturation of whenever the BBC News is on, we have this oversaturation of reds on the screen. And I've spotted that they also use a lot of blue in the stage lighting for the stage set for the news, and the same with this Watchdog programme, and the same with many of the other studio programmes that I see. If you go over to Jeremy Vile over on whatever it is, ITV or wherever he is, and you'll see the vivacity of the colours that they're using, and again these very saturated blues, these very saturated reds, and often both on the screen at the same time. And essentially what we have there is we have the signal for a baddie. We have the signal for be scared. If this was at the pantomime, this would be the he's behind you moment, okay? And the backdrop would be flashed in a purple, blue and red uplighting to indicate fear and arousal. And so what we have is this: if it was just colour branding of a sort for the channel, that would be reasonably acceptable. We know that colour has a huge impact on mood, and that red can make you feel hot, and that blue rooms can make you feel cold. I actually had we were mentioning Brian Eno in the chat box before the show, that Both Ends Burning playing. I once went to a Brian Eno sound and light installation, which was simply like an opaque polytunnel or series of interconnecting polytunnels with lights being shone from the outside and various ambient tones running in different parts of the chambers, and the lights would kind of move up and down the chambers or change colour and hue. And it was the most peculiar sensation, having walked in there for only the briefest of times. I was first struck with the sort of curiosity of it, but then within just a few paces up the very first polytunnel, I was immediately struck with the incredible skin sensations and things that you would feel. The light would change on the outside of this polytunnel, and the sensation on your skin would change, and your feeling. You know, I mean, there was one area that was that would change from a crimson red to a real deep blue, and you would literally go from feeling slightly too warm to feeling distinctly cold, merely with this change of light. So it's clearly understood the physiological changes that can be affected on people through the application of various specific frequencies of light and various specific combinations of colour saturation and tonal quality to various sounds that accompany those tonal qualities of the colour saturation qualities of the light. Now look around, and we see on EastEnders, we see on Hollyoaks, we see on, not so much on the sort of Emmerdale and Coronation Streets of this world, I'm not quite so sure where they are on this, but we see comedy shows start to look at the positioning of the camera, start to critically appraise that what is being presented to you, and maybe go back and compare it with some. I mean, I'm a huge movie fan, particularly a movie director fan. I adore the immersive quality of going to see a great film. There's very, very few of them ever actually been made, but the ones that have been made are of such immense artistry that by studying what it is that makes those art and everything else not, you gain a much broader kind of brush. It would be a bit like going to see an art gallery or something and understanding how all of these many artists have interpreted, brush on canvas over all of the centuries, and from that formulate a much greater understanding of what it is to paint. And so I'm sitting there and I'm watching the television. I drive her nuts. You cannot watch, anything other than a real highbrow movie without me sitting there and dissecting the bloody camera shots and the bad edits and the poor audio and all the rest of it. But this is the issue is that I don't receive the mainstream media as a passive observer. I perceive it as someone who has participated in the creative art itself, in the construction of these images, and so I understand exactly what it takes to achieve some of these bizarre bloody framed shots at these. EastEnders was one that struck me very recently. I've seen much more recently, as well as this ridiculous levels of colour saturation, really unnatural levels. I mean, just go to your iPlayer, stick on EastEnders, and then bring up, I don't know, like a YouTube channel of some, I don't know, like a nature program or something, and look at the light saturation, the colour saturation, the colour hues that you're being presented with. Or even as a direct comparison, I don't know, look for some stock footage of a real pub, yeah, and begin to consider what the differences are between those colour saturations, and suddenly you realise that everything is over-egged with the red, over-egged with the blue. Everything is intense. Everything is in your face. And that what I've realised by watching a bit of an EastEnders episode recently was that not only are they using very fast jump cuts, that in a scene that would normally only need 2 frames of 2 separate scenes from a camera to fully acquaint the viewer with that scene and to present it in such a way that you felt immersed in it, they might fill that same 2-shot scene with maybe 7 or 8 jump cuts, and we'll have jump cuts for no apparent reason. We'll have jump cuts to ridiculous, small, focused in parts of the scene that have no real significance or relevance. And again, we could see this as, the editors just simply, thinking that they're crafting their art or something and making something more dramatic by making it more pacey, by placing more stops and starts in the image. But essentially what this actually does is it's jarring to the mind and jarring to the eye. This isn't how we perceive the world. The art of the cameraman is to replicate the human eye, apart from in the most extremes of circumstances when you are trying to deceive the eye or intentionally trying to, create an arty shot, a shot that looks unnatural. There's the word, natural. A cameraman should really do his best to capture the shot with as much of its natural quality as possible, so as to make the viewer feel as immersed in the image and scenery as possible. Go look at 2001. Just the level of the cinematography throughout that film, whatever you think of Asimov, whatever you think of Kubrick as a producer, with his range of films, that film in particular stands out head and shoulders, and I would actually suggest that nearly everything of Kubrick's was so intensely studied frame by frame and shot by shot that he probably actually stands head and shoulders above most other producers. Very mechanistic, but still beautifully framed, beautifully shot, beautifully lit. And again, without this colour saturation, without this artificial colour saturation, everything is especially in 2001, the space ship scenes where they're kind of jogging around in the spaceship, and the colour saturation is almost perfectly normal, and as a result you literally feel as if you're on board that space station with them. I defy anybody to watch an edition of EastEnders and feel themselves to be more immersed in the scene because of the vibrancy of the colour that is being presented with you. But what I think we're seeing here is almost like a Teletubbies effect, that we're being presented with these bright shiny colours with no substance behind them, and loud crashing music and spiky music and music that's designed to detract and distract, rather than actual substance and meaning to the images that we're being presented. And so essentially we all, as a nation, we turn off in front of the television. How many times have you heard that expression? You sit down in front of the television to turn off. You know what I mean? Well, that is the most dangerous goddamn mindset to be in. If you are so disconnected from a subject that you are turned off, but you are still perceiving that subject, you are still hearing it, you are still seeing it, your subconscious is still absorbing it. And this is the most powerful mind control tool known to mankind, is the direct accessing of the subconscious, bypassing the conscious mind. If you can directly access the subconscious, if you can directly implant thoughts into the subconscious mind without it having any impact on the conscious mind, those subconscious programmings will be completely undetected by the brain. You will be so unaware of them, you would be, it would be like a conjurer's trick. If somebody could show you that programming at some, later date, it would be as if somebody had done something to you by magic, when in fact the only magic was you dozing off in front of bloody EastEnders and letting that kind of sickness ooze into your brain, bypassing your frontal cortex. Right. I was asleep on the settee at bloody 9:15. What the bloody hell am I doing at the mic now? I'll bang on a tune and kind of raise my thoughts and have a graze through the chat box. Oh, this will wake me up now. Bit of a reef. Come back prior. Took me off the ball as usual. Okay, I've still got busy fingers. I'll tell you what, while I'm just finishing this off, I'll recount a little tale for you. I was listening to Radio 4, I don't know, mid-afternoon. I was stuck in the car somewhere. Oh, that was it, yeah, I was coming back from seeing how Ben, as it goes. And this kind of satirical play for the day came on. I got the sneaking suspicion it might be a regular thing because it was very oddly framed if it was a one-off. But anyway, the kind of comedic theme for this Radio 4 show was the radio scriptwriter seeking a play in order to prevent him from being destitute. And it was coined in a very odd framework where the scriptwriter's scripts had been declined by the BBC and returned, and his son, as part of his school media project, was somehow getting the father's plays aired, but without there having actually been any payment made for the services, due to it being a school project of some sort. That was kind of like a subtext running to it. But the main theme of the programme was this bizarre story about Don McLean, the one-time famous Crackerjack star, having been crucially important, having played a vital role in the winning of the Cold War. And I'm like, what? What the hell? And first met with incredulity. I mean, first I meet this line with incredulity, thinking what a ridiculous theme for a comedy show. And as this theme is expanded upon and elaborated, I begin to realise that the Crackerjack audience would have been entirely made up of cubs and girl guides, all in uniform. At the mere mention of the word Crackerjack, they would all immediately jump to their feet and scream Crackerjack at the drop of a hat. And for this, they may be rewarded with an occasional Crackerjack pencil. And again, at the mention of the word Crackerjack, the whole audience was meant to erupt and respond instantaneously to the presenter's jaunty delivery. And this was actually caged. I mean, I don't know if any of you remember Crackerjack, but it was fucking awful. It was really low-grade children's TV. It was children's TV of the very lowest slapstick, the very lowest humour, the very most base possible production standards and artistic intentions. It was just lowbrow. Obviously, at the time it would have come across as that lowbrow nature was somehow satirical and tongue-in-cheek. But when I actually went and had a look around YouTube and that, just to see if there were any old archive stuff of it, to actually see what it would look like looking at it now with this kind of mindset. But it just struck me that this comedy play on Radio 4 may actually be giving out an awful lot more than is presented on the surface. I mean, I'm not going to start claiming that Don McLean of Crackerjack fame was in fact an MI6 double agent working on the far side of the Berlin Wall. But if you were going to have an MI6 double agent working throughout Europe and into communist Russia, surely, a TV presenter or, somebody in the public eye would be less suspected than, many other people. And then to add to that, what I then realised was the insidious mind control programming of the Crackerjack programming. I mean, you put Crackerjack and Blue Peter in every single child's life for probably 20 years. And with this subconscious programming that I'm talking about, if you can imagine the saturation level that you're going to reach with that kind of an audience, with that level of attentiveness, with all of its most core, visceral desires being met, while at the same time being presented with this bland pastiche. So, the veneer on the surface would appear to be very twee and very pastoral, but scratched very, very slimly, very shallowly under the surface, and suddenly this whole kind of stand up, sit down, go left, go right programming is self-evidently there. And with the more, with Blue Peter, it was more subtle, and it was very much more pernicious. The subtle undercurrent of racism, the fact that you would only ever see a very token black face on Blue Peter until very, very recently. It was when they were called out for this kind of policy that they actually introduced their first black presenter on there. Before then, you could have counted the number of black faces that you'd seen on Blue Peter, other than when they were visiting a foreign land, on the fingers of one hand, really. And usually they would be put at the back of any audience, of any group of children. And again, this, do you know what I mean? It would have been Blue Peter. I should imagine that, the propaganda of, love the British Army, love the British military came through, because who would they have involved in every single activity? And Top Gear is another one. Where the fuck did Top Gear get off in involving the British Navy, the British Army, ex-British vets with their limbs blown off, involved in a fucking wheelchair race over a mountain, for crying out loud? You know what I mean? They couldn't have got just any paraplegics and done that race. No, they had to race against military paraplegics. You know what I mean? And it's just this kind of pernicious, subtle undercurrent of propaganda. It's not in your face. It's not, you know what I mean? Careless talk costs lives. It's not wartime propaganda. This is very much a peacetime version of the same stuff that would be rolled out during the height of wartime. And and without being aware of it, we become victim to it. So I suppose this is what I'm asking you all to do, is to stop being... I know that most of you won't be passive purveyors of mainstream media, that you will have a critical eye with which you view things. But what I'd like you to take from this evening is this cameraman's perspective, this director and editor's perspective, this perspective of the sound man, this perspective of the machinery of making the shot. If there is a very oddly framed shot, if you're looking at a scene from an odd angle, one of the ones that was used in EastEnders recently was a kind of like a 45-degree shot up from the floor. Well, if you're a bloody cameraman, that is not where you're going to choose to make that shot from. It's going to be bloody uncomfortable, it's going to be really hard to frame the shot, and it's going to look like some scene out of some film noir murder slasher. And this particular scene was nothing of the sort. It was just a very ordinary domestic scene with just the most slender levels of tension being built into the scene from the lines that the actors were delivering, and their kind of emotional, their acting of the emotional content of those lines. But most of the emotional content of the scene was made with this ridiculous camera angle, which set the scene with a real angst. And I actually felt physically uncomfortable watching the scene. And even being aware of what was happening didn't prevent the physical sensation being imparted from... It's a bit like... I don't know, it'd be a bit like going to the cinema and watching one of those pictures, a film from sitting in a roller coaster ride seat. You know what I mean? It's the visual impression imparts a physical sensation, and that certainly for me, many of those kind of angular juxtaposed shots I find incredibly off-putting and unnerving, and I suspect that that's what they're being put there for. Certainly I seem to be seeing a kind of a broad brush use of mainstream media in a way that I previously didn't believe was actually possible, and I still am incredulous as to how this kind of propagandising of everything at every level throughout the mainstream media on virtually any outlet that you receive can be controlled to any great degree. I can only imagine that it must be, peer pressure and directives from management leading to corporate peer pressure. So if you have had your work rejected because X, Y, and Z was in it, then it wouldn't be necessary. I mean, if you're watching your fellow produce a piece of work with X, Y, and Z in it that you know is going to be refused or objected to, then you'll kind of nudge him in the ribs and go, "Nah, leave that out, mate." You know what I mean? You don't want to put that shot in there. The bosses won't like that one. And so we get this. It may just be that we've got this kind of overarching. Again, it's everyone wants to please the boss. You know what I mean? Isn't that the case in any bloody work? So does it? I don't know if it really needs to be anything more than simply the high level kind of management that actually have any kind of grasp on this agenda. And certainly where that's concerned, I would suspect that you will probably see many of the same faces on many of the boards of directors of many of the so-called rival media companies. Certainly in the wider AV media world, there are actually very few large companies and many subsidiary companies. So you very rarely actually see the actual face of the people that you're working for, which is why I'm out of there. If I can't shake you by the hand, I ain't fucking working for you. I don't care what money you got. Oh, for fuck's sake, that's the boy. Go and bite his arse. He knows I'm on there. He doesn't care anyway. He comes and fucking knocks at the door and doesn't get on the back.
It didn't
Yes.
work. It didn't work. I tried pushing it, but it didn't go.
Yes.
Sorry.
You bloody will be.
Sorry.
You will be. Now piss off. Right, where the hell was I before I was so rudely interrupted? Now he's bloody left the door open. One of the dogs has walked out, and she's bound to want to come back in if I close the door. Right, I'm going to close it anyway. Do you remember those things that you used to stick on the top of your pencils in school in the 70s called gonks? They were like a little bit of nylon fluff, usually in pink or bright green. Well, if my cat was pink or bright green, he would look almost exactly like a fucking gonk at the moment. Sleeping on the top of the settee. Garden cat. Right, so where were we going with this? Alright, okay, so we've covered mainstream media through film and TV, and these are the two kind of most widely absorbed media contents that we see being presented to us on a daily basis. Of course, we also have the written word through kind of literature and the newsprint, largely all of which is controlled by the same very few, very rich men with large companies owning umbrella companies that cover the dissemination of all this sort of stuff. Then we've got to really look into where we put our children, you know what I mean, into whose hands do we place the responsibility of the rearing of the next generation. And we put them into somewhere where they are made to sit in rows or cross-legged on the floor. They are made to pay attention to the object of authority, the font of all wisdom, the teacher at the front of the class. We're all made to face the same way. The school bell rings at the end of the class and we all leap to our feet and run from one class to the next. Why do the children change class? Surely would it not be a more settling environment for young children to remain in a single class and to have the teacher change if a teacher's speciality doesn't stretch to covering the part of the curriculum that's required? Would it be not a far more nurturing environment to see that the children are maintained in a state of alert calmness, of being perplexed and intrigued by the subjects that they're being asked to remember and understand, being shown the wonder that the universe is? Or do we simply put them in classrooms where they're forced to learn the alphabet and the times table by rote and never really given any deeper education into the substance of those arts and of those cultures? and then, God forbid, that you step out of line. I mean, in my day, it was the bloody slipper and the cane. And obviously, other sanctions like detentions and stuff, but even just detentions alone. Behave or we will keep you even longer in your prison, little man. Alarming thing that I'm hearing from my children as well is of teachers bellowing in children's faces if they don't do as they're told, if they don't behave, if they don't conform. And it appears to be non-conformity that seems to provoke this particular sort of rage, especially from sort of alpha male teachers. And as a result, I'm monitoring their reports of what goes on at their school very closely at the moment, and have a couple of teachers lined up in my sights right now for possibly a few words in their shell-like. But what really sort of worries me is that this sort of behaviour has been identified, and certainly, I remember from, as far as the teaching profession goes, both my mother and elder sister went through teacher training college in my early teens and adulthood. My sister was a few years older than me, but I sort of was party to her being trained as a teacher, and certainly took an active interest in her training. And then later, in my late teens, my mother had been a school secretary all of her life, also decided to join the profession, and I pretty much sat her degree course with her. Funnily enough, one of the most interesting points about sitting my degree course with my mother was that was one of the things that really opened my eyes to the world of programming through the mainstream media, because part of her education, education degree was that would be Michael, wouldn't it now? Typical. Part of her teaching degree was a kind of social sciences element, and this covered the mechanisms, the machinery that the advertisers use to basically sociologically guide the population, the viewing population. And I think my mother may have gripped some of its implications, because we certainly became very much more discerning TV viewers after that. We would more often than not turn the television off rather than be presented with programming that we didn't want to watch, which was certainly one change that came after that time. But I remember certainly for my personal take on it, I suddenly became hugely aware of what was being presented through the media image, be that the magazine cover of a magazine, or the nightly news, or the soap opera, or the comedy show. Funnily enough, I was also responsible, partly involved in the creation of the sort of Apollo franchise. Basically, you have all of the Live at the Apollo comedians are now essentially the only comedians that you will see on TV. If you haven't seen them go through Live at the Apollo, you won't see them on TV, is pretty much rule of thumb. And that's not a huge number of comedians. And essentially, if you listen to the output of all of those comedians, there are a few that very occasionally try to get a sort of anti-government sentiment over through their comedy, but more likely than not, they're pretty much towing the party line and very much staying within the safe boundaries of comedy that aren't going to tread on any governmental toes. My actual part in that little sham was I was actually working the Apollo just before the beginning of the filming of the Live at the Apollo series. I was actually there with Billy Connolly, cameraman for him. I did 5 weeks. And that was essentially immediately preceding the Live at the Apollo series, and essentially used a very similar sort of format, only with Billy himself doing the actual show part. So I'm very much convinced that was essentially a preparation show as a planning for the sort of Live at the Apollo shows, as a way of testing the audience capacity and things for that particular venue at that time. And what have we got now? We've now got stadium bloody comedians. I mean, since when does a comedian fill a fucking stadium, for Christ's sakes, you know what I mean? Even Billy Connolly in his heyday would have struggled filling anything more than a large theatre or a big sort of music venue. I'm absolutely knackered. Where was I going with this? Right, education. All right, yeah. So we've got this built-in programming through the behaviour and behaviour of teachers and the institution of the schools and the curriculum, the very narrow curriculum that's taught in inverted commas, forced upon our children. And again, we see this, children needing to attend school in uniform, children needing to attend school exactly on time. If you're a few minutes late, then you'll be sanctioned with detentions and you'll be kept after school. And essentially, if school was such a damn good place to be, there would never need to be anything called a fucking detention. There would never need to be anything, by way of punishment for a child misbehaving in a school. A school doesn't need to be that place. I raise and teach my children. I have hordes of their friends round. We'll do all manner of things together. And never do I need to resort to punishment as a means of forcing my will upon them. It's simply a matter of being, the brighter spark in the room, the one with the best ideas, the one with the best things to say, that makes them pay attention to you. And if you're not that, then get the fuck out the teaching industry. And it is a fucking industry as well. These are machines for turning out factory fodder and bloody cannon fodder. That's certainly what my fucking comprehensive education was all about. I'm like bloody weak limit 3-day-old lettuce leaf today, and not getting any bloody spark gear. I need some loud music. Where's my loud music? Where's my loud music button? I need a loud music button. That's what I need, is a jingle that's just some really hideously loud, crashy piece of frigging tune. Right, where are we? MP3 backup. White Stripes will probably do what we're going to have. I hate this on air. It's always fucking takes me hours to find it. I've actually got a bloody 46 gigabyte bloody music library here that I have to scroll through every time I want to find a tune. It's ridiculous, even though it's alphabetised and all the rest of it. It's where are we? What did I say? Oh yeah. This will do, just for the time being. So your eyes on the road and your hand upon the wheel.
Ladies and gentlemen, from Los Angeles, California, the Doors!